Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. Going into 2021, the pandemic is now killing more people, shutting down more nonprofits and small businesses, along with wiping out the livelihoods of families, neighborhoods, and communities. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
I think in the relief game, meaning the PPP game and EIDL and anything else that you're going to pursue, you've got to read everything and be super prepared. I give this advice to not only my nonprofit, but my for-profit small business clients, that you've got to go at that thing with exacting accounting, and you've got to really hit that because you don't want to get hung up in the machinery where there's open questions and things. So you've really got to dig in on that. So be very, very well prepared and do an inordinate amount of reading to really understand what these programs really are intended to do, because you can see why it is they're after certain information and how good it needs to be.
This is advisor to nonprofit and mission-driven organizations, Al Spector. Given the financial struggles of both our nonprofits and small business organizations, we wanted to feature Al and ask him to share both his expertise and best practices to hopefully help folks through the process of securing funding through the various government funding opportunities. I'm joined remotely via Zoom by Al Spector. He's an advisor to nonprofit and mission-driven organizations. Thank you for being here, Al.
Pleasure, George. Nice to be with you today.
The reason I wanted to have you on the show is because of your expertise in doing something that's very hard to do, I think, for a lot of nonprofits and small businesses, especially now with CARES Act 2, is to try to figure out the system, how to apply and secure financing. So could you please provide a little background to the audience on your creating a nonprofit, but also working with nonprofits and small businesses?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I won't go on too long about where I've been, but I think some of it might be interesting to the audience. I did a couple of decades of working in fairly large companies, and I had some corporate posts, kind of classic. I was in-house counsel for a big distribution American company. I was responsible to manage some international logistics. I've been in business development in the Silicon Valley for a tech company. So my background started as a corporate manager. In about 2005, I decided to step off the grid, leave corporate life for a while, and start a small business as a sailing school here in Marin County. And that was my version of off the grid, was to start a sailing school. Things were going quite well about 18 months after establishing the business. An important thing happened to me. An old friend of mine brought me some blind students to learn to sail. And that was let's call it a transformative day, and a very impactful day to me, and teaching a couple of blind people to sail for the first time, the day I'll never forget. Well, anyway, we decided we teach a couple more, and then what it really developed into was a program to teach blind and vision impaired people to sail. We pivoted the for-profit company to support a nonprofit effort to open access to blind and vision impaired people to sail and race sailing boats in San Francisco Bay. Just a tiny more bigger piece of that, and we'll move on. At one point, we were in the U.S. Blind Sailing National Championships in 2008, the World Blind Sailing Championships in 2009. while I was at the helm 11 years of the organization, I think 7 U.S. blind sailing national championships, a couple of world championships. We started to go up into Canada at their invitation, and we would actually come home with the trophy for the Canadian Invitational Blind Sailing Regatta. It was quite a thing. It happened somewhat accidentally. Not those wins. We were helped with some very generous yachtsmen that became our racing coaches. So there's a background for how it is I entered the nonprofit world, was somewhat accidentally by having a sailing school, being presented with a proposition to have access to an underserved population. It was, fairly easy thing to do. It started with fiscal sponsor, and the next thing I know, we're rolling, and didn't look up for 11 years. So that's the background for it. Along the way, I continued to consult for-profit businesses, but also increasingly nonprofits and folks that were interested in my model. I had created a little hybrid. And there were folks in the other sailing schools in the country, and then myriad small nonprofits that wanted some guidance from me as a business consultant.
Great. And so as you've been working with both nonprofits and small businesses, especially over this last 10 months of COVID hitting, what are some of the things that you are seeing out there and working with a variety of different clients that COVID-19 is really impacting?
Well, some of it is devastating. Obviously, the complete suspension of some fantastic programs serving underserved folks, but there's also some, let's call it, I don't know, silver lining, but there's some good in it. And what I think is good in it, and we get to that in a bit, but the nonprofits that I have as clients, and I'm on the board of a couple, and I can speak, I actually talked to a handful of my clients today in the nonprofits where I'm on the board, and they were comfortable with my, telling some things about them. The ones that did the best were innovative and were able to adapt to the situation. They protected their mission. They adjusted their programming. They put in an extra effort for some fundraising, really, really worked hard, protected the staffs best they could. So it was a big wallop. And for a few months there, when everything came to a halt, that was a tough time. I'm fortunate to have witnessed some nonprofits doing a miraculous job of rising to the occasion.
So much of the nonprofit and small business sector has just been decimated because everything completely got shut down. And several restaurants that have been on the show just talked about their last straw was all outside dining was killed, for example. So in working with the nonprofits and small businesses, how have you been helping them with regards to trying to figure out the labyrinth, if you will, of securing funding from the federal government?
Sure. Well, I didn't say in my introduction, I do a lot of support for fairly small nonprofits under a couple of $1 million in annual budgets through a client of mine where I actually have taken a post inside of his company to help him in the best way I could. It's called Mission Met, and it's a strategic planning solution for small nonprofits. And I actually refer to it typically as strategic action planning for a very intended purpose. So I do a lot from a strategic planner's perspective. And so we start there. We don't belabor it. We're going to just, think strategically. And so some of my support has been to provide strategic action planning just in response to COVID-19 and to the pandemic and how to survive it. Bring the time frame for the strategic planning down to, 60 days, 90 days, and let's figure out what to do. But it causes some nonprofits, and I do this for some for-profits as well, small businesses. They're thinking strategically in a new way, and some of it's absolutely critical to survive. So it starts with some framework of a little strategic planning, but it quickly gets to the finances, which are, the lifeline. So it's in addition to some fundraising discussions, but it's also, okay, where's the relief? What can we do? I'm an advisor to the SBA's network of advisories called the SBDCs. I've been doing that for a few years, and therein lies a lot of support for small businesses that are facing the EIDL program, the PPP program, the California Relief Grant Program, and others in the local programs, in Marin County, some of the municipalities. So I happen to be sitting in a spot where there was a lot of relief programs to guide folks, and the nonprofits giving access to some of those for the very first time. So part of this strategic thinking is, okay, here's some relief we can get. How much of the staff can we support this way? How much fundraising do we need to do? And so therein lies a integrated financial strategy along with the programming and how we're going to survive this. And it's try to keep your time frames as tight as you can, but envision where we're headed. So that's how this kind of all happened. And the volume is pretty high. The beauty of it, if you got to look for where there's beauty in this whole thing, is that the nonprofits are, kind of coming out into the sun in this, in a way, where there's a real appreciation in the press. You see the nonprofits, stories in the press, but also the access to the SBA-backed loans for the first time. And increasingly, and now in the second round, even more so with the chambers of commerce and the associations and, in the 501c6s. So therein, I think, lies where some of this real good is that there's a recognition for the nonprofit community and its big, considerable piece of the economy and in the aggregate, huge employers. So I think there's some good in there.
What would you say are some of the common issues that small businesses and nonprofits are facing with regard to trying to figure out how to secure or the ability to successfully secure any of the forms of funding, whether it's county, city, state, or federal?
That's a great question. Here's a few things about that. Number one, nonprofits not used to borrowing. They don't like it. I think the way the body politic works. So there is a bit of an obstacle, cultural sort of, to overcome. When we first faced the rush at the EIDL loans, those emergency injury loans, that was quite a time as the nonprofits given access to those. They were first the grants, and then it was a long-term borrowing. So that's where I encountered some of my nonprofits had to get over that hurdle, but they knew that this PPP program, which is a forgivable loan and more of a grant if you play by the rules, they're way more interested in that, but they still had to borrow. They had to navigate through some administrative things. So my support was to coach strategically about being borrowers and, the advantages of it and also kind of the cautions of it. But also we faced in the applications in particular for the EIDL loans and for the PPP loans, as well as for the California Relief Grant, the application wasn't built for nonprofits. It was built for for-profits. And there were some questions on there that just didn't, they were not illogical for nonprofits and percentage of ownerships and things like that. So that was the early days of it, was how to get nonprofits through that. There was some questions about it. But, not all that much different once you got over some of those hurdles and some of the financial analysis of it and how to calculate your PPP loan and things like that. And the process is pretty much the same as small business. I think that some of the challenges for the nonprofits, other than, navigating it, getting through it, but it's to think strategically and to reimagine themselves or envision what it's going to be like at the other end of it. I'm on the board of a small nonprofit in the East Bay called BORP, B-O-R-P. It's the Bay Area Outreach Recreation Program. It's a 45-year-old organization that provides access to sports and recreation facilities for physically disabled. Fantastic little organization, small but mighty. I'm on the finance committee, so I'm a pretty active board member there. And we crafted a strategy to maximize what we could get in EIDL, to maximize what we can get in PPP. And it was great because we're able to retain the staff. We're able to work hard at reshaping the programming. Some of the programming came to a screeching halt: wheelchair basketball and sled hockey and team sports that were impossible. Shifted the attention to the cycling center. It's one of the largest adaptive cycling centers in the world. It's in Berkeley. We expanded its hours, used it as a principal vehicle. And one of my favorite things is that the online exercise programming for physically disabled virtually exploded. We had just begun to start some of that programming, but it made it a necessity, and now it blossomed beautifully. We had the annual fundraiser virtually. It's typically a ride up in the wine country for a couple of hundred riders, half of whom are in adaptive cycles. We had to do the whole thing virtually, raised more money than ever. It was a record. And so the technology was there, the creativity was there. And that's one of my favorite stories, is the BORP's reaction to the pandemic and standing stronger as we roll through it.
Thank you. That was a great example and a great story. Al, you've been at this for a while, coming on 10 months now of working with the nonprofit and small business sector. Do you have some suggested best practices? So for a nonprofit leader or small business owner who might be listening or watching the show, what are some of the best practices that you have identified to work your way through the system, but also back to your strategic planning idea, things that people should be strategically setting themselves up for, because, this is not coming to an end anytime soon?
A few things. Stay strong, have a vision for where you're going. The mission is something, I think we can all identify with, but it's that vision that's really the difficult thing. And it's challenging in the environment that we're in. So it's maintain that. One of my clients is a nonprofit called the City Surf Project, takes inner city kids for surfing lessons for the first time they've been to the beach, lots of them. The enthusiasm, the creativity, be bold about where we're headed, and comes through in their Friday afternoon gatherings virtually. And so that enthusiasm and a vision of where you're going is important. I think in the relief game, meaning the PPP game and IDLE and anything else that you're going to pursue, you've got to read everything and be super prepared. I give this advice to not only my nonprofit, but my for-profit small business clients, that you've got to go at that thing with exacting accounting, and you've got to really hit that, because you don't want to get hung up in the machinery where there's open questions and things. So you've really got to dig in on that. So be very, very well prepared, and do an inordinate amount of reading to really understand what these programs really are intended to do, because you can see why it is they're after certain information and how good it needs to be. So I see that one. And I think hold steady. I think that's always a good piece of advice, is don't be hasty, hold steady, and, stay steady through the storm.
Thank you. That was great advice. So final question, out of the pandemic and our economic meltdown, what are some of the good things that you could see coming out of this for the clients that you work with, the small businesses, the nonprofits?
A few things. Some nonprofits that I've had the pleasure and honor of guiding along, they've reached for their strength. Rather than try to be all things, too broad of programming, too many things, they've reached for their strengths, and their strengths were tapped for them. A group in Southern California that's concerned with early childhood development, they exploded as a diaper bank. And they were like, well, what about this? And what about that? And we just go with this diaper bank, sit tight. And they were fantastic at it. And also the community came to them who knew them. So it was a perfect fit. So I think it forces nonprofits to really see where their real sweet spot is and where they deliver, the most value. I think that's a good thing. Some of the skill set, the financial awareness and the accounting awareness, and it's something that none of us really, there's plenty of people that really love it, but that's just the necessary stuff of running small businesses and nonprofits. But you can see how critical that is about financial planning and how all the accounting works and all that. So I think that there's some capacity building in financial management of nonprofits that I think is going to come out of this, nicely. And then I think in a general sense, I referred to it earlier, that nonprofits clearly, given some of their due, there's a long way to go, but it's a recognized piece of the employers and of the economy. And getting through here, I can't see the nonprofits being left behind again in something like an SBA-backed relief programs. No way. And so here it is cemented. There was, I think, appreciable success in getting some of the money to the nonprofits. Didn't get quite to the smalls like it should have. This next round, or this what's now currently just launched round, hoping that some of what the program's architecture has done is really going to result with these smalls getting it. And so that's my hope. And certainly there's an awareness of nonprofits and how important they are to us. It's out there.
Thank you, Al. That was really great insights. I want to thank you for coming on the show today and all of the work you do with nonprofits and small businesses to help them not only secure funding, but work on their strategic plan, everyone's favorite plan idea that takes a lot of time, and then you always keep postponing that. You'll get to that strategic plan. Sounds like now is the time to get to one strategic plan. So we're going to make sure that everybody who's watching and listening to this has your contact information. And if for people who want to find out more information about you and your wonderful background, they can find you on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that's on the episode landing page as well. And just want to thank you for all that you do, and please stay safe out there.
Thanks, George. We appreciate you having me on the show.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voice of Al Spector, an advisor to nonprofit and mission-driven organizations. To find out more about all the services Al offers to both nonprofits and small businesses, please go to linkedin.com/Alan J. Spector. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.